Hello, I'm Nurse Sarah Mitchell, and I work in the cardiac intensive care unit at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. 3 weeks ago, a 48-year-old male patient named John Mitchell was admitted with a massive heart attack. When I asked about his condition and what might have led to such severe cardiac stress, he began sharing his life story with me. What I heard over the next several days was the most heartbreaking story I've ever encountered in my 15 years of nursing. John Mitchell wasn't always the broken man lying in this hospital bed. Just 5 years ago, he was one of Boston's most successful real estate developers, living in a beautiful mansion in the exclusive neighborhood of Beacon Hill. He had everything that people dream about: a thriving business, a loving family, respect in the community, and financial security that most people could only imagine. "Nurse Sarah," John said to me in a weak voice, his eyes filled with tears, "I want to tell you my story, not because I'm looking for sympathy, but because I need someone to understand how a man can lose everything in the blink of an eye, how the people you trust most in this world can destroy you completely." John grew up in a middle-class family in South Boston. His father was a construction worker, and his mother worked as a school teacher. They didn't have much money, but they had something more valuable. They had love, integrity, and strong values. From a young age, John's father taught him that hard work and honesty were the keys to success in life. When John was 12 years old, a new family moved into the house next door. They had a son named David Peterson, who was the same age as John. The two boys became instant best friends. They did everything together, played basketball, went to the same school, studied together, and dreamed about their futures. David's family was similar to John's: hardworking, honest people who believed in the American dream. John and David made a pact when they were 15 years old. They were sitting on the roof of John's house one summer night, looking at the stars, and David said, "John, let's promise each other something. Whatever happens in life, we'll always be there for each other. We'll be brothers forever." John shook his hand and said, "Brothers forever, no matter what." Those words would later haunt John in ways he couldn't imagine that day. After high school, both boys worked hard to put themselves through college. John studied business and real estate development at Boston University, while David studied finance and accounting at the same university. They shared an apartment, worked part-time jobs, and supported each other through the tough times. Their friendship only grew stronger with each passing year. It was during their junior year at university that John met Emma Collins. She was a beautiful, intelligent girl studying psychology, and John fell in love with her the moment he saw her in the university library. Emma came from a wealthy family in Cambridge, but she wasn't arrogant or materialistic. She was kind, compassionate, and down to earth. John was nervous about asking Emma out because she came from such a different background, but David encouraged him, saying, "John, you're an amazing person. Any girl would be lucky to have you. Just be yourself." John finally gathered the courage to ask Emma out, and to his surprise and joy, she said yes. Their relationship blossomed quickly. Emma loved John's honesty, his work ethic, and his dreams for the future. She didn't care that he came from a working-class background or that he worked as a waiter to pay for his education. She saw the man he truly was: ambitious, kind, and full of integrity. After 2 years of dating, John proposed to Emma in the Boston Public Garden. It was a simple proposal. He couldn't afford an expensive ring, but Emma didn't care. She said yes with tears of joy in her eyes. They got married 6 months later in a small, beautiful ceremony attended by close friends and family. David was John's best man at the wedding. In his speech, David said, "I've known John since we were 12 years old. He's not just my best friend, he's my brother. I've watched him grow into an incredible man, and I know he'll be an amazing husband to Emma. John, Emma, I promise I'll always be there for both of you, through good times and bad." Those words would later become the cruelest joke of John's life. After graduation, John and David decided to start a business together. They combined their skills: John's knowledge of real estate development and David's expertise in finance, to create Mitchell and Peterson Real Estate Development Company. They started small, renovating old houses and selling them for profit. Emma supported John completely. She worked as a counselor at a community center while John and David built their business. In the first 2 years, the company struggled. There were times when John and Emma couldn't pay their rent, times when they survived on pasta and canned soup. But Emma never complained. She believed in John's dream. David was equally committed. He and John worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. They did everything themselves. Found properties, negotiated deals, supervised renovations, handled marketing. Their partnership was perfect because they complemented each other's skills and trusted each other completely. The breakthrough came in their third year of business. They bought an old warehouse in a developing neighborhood, converted it into luxury condominiums, and sold all the units for a huge profit. Suddenly, Mitchell and Peterson Real Estate Development was on the map. Investors started calling. Banks were willing to give them loans. Their business exploded. Over the next 10 years, the company grew beyond John's wildest dreams. They developed shopping centers, office buildings, luxury apartment complexes, and gated communities. John and David became millionaires. Their company was valued at over $50 million. John moved his family to a magnificent mansion in Beacon Hill. By this time, he and Emma had 3 children, 2 daughters, Sophie and Grace, and a son, Michael. The house had 7 bedrooms, a swimming pool, a home theater, and a tennis court. John bought Emma a Mercedes, sent his children to the best private schools, and could afford anything they wanted. But despite all the wealth, John remained humble. He never forgot where he came from. He donated generously to charities, helped his parents retire comfortably, and always treated his employees with respect. Emma loved him even more for staying grounded despite their success. David also became wealthy. He married a woman named Rebecca, had 2 children, and bought a mansion not far from John's house. The 2 families spent holidays together, went on vacations together, and their children grew up as close as siblings. John trusted David with everything. They were equal partners in the business. Each owned 50%. They had never signed a detailed partnership agreement because John believed that trust was more important than legal documents. When his lawyer advised him to have a comprehensive partnership contract, John refused, saying, "David is my brother. I trust him with my life. I don't need a contract." That decision would destroy him. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 5 years ago. John arrived at the company office and found David acting strangely. He seemed nervous, avoided eye contact, and kept making excuses to leave the office. "David, is everything okay?" John asked with concern. Yeah, everything's fine," David replied quickly. "Just stressed about the Riverside project. You know how it is." John didn't think much of it at the time. The Riverside project was indeed a large development, and stress was normal in their business. But over the next few weeks, David's behavior became more unusual. He started coming to the office late, leaving early, and seemed distracted during meetings. John tried to talk to him several times, but David always brushed off his concerns. "I'm fine, John. Just dealing with some personal stuff. Nothing to worry about." Then, on a Friday morning in November, John's entire world collapsed. He arrived at the office to find police cars and federal agents surrounding the building. His heart raced as he rushed inside. The receptionist was crying, and employees were standing around in shocked silence. "What's happening?" John demanded. A federal agent approached him. "Are you John Mitchell?" "Yes, what's going on?" "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Agent Rodriguez from the FBI. We have a warrant to seize all company records and assets. Your company is under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." John felt like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "What? That's impossible. There must be some mistake." "Where is your partner, David Peterson?" the agent asked. "I don't know. I just got here. He should be..." "David Peterson disappeared 3 days ago." The agent interrupted. "We believe he's fled the country. Mr. Mitchell, we need you to come with us for questioning." The next several hours were a nightmare. At the FBI office, agents showed John evidence that devastated him. For the past 2 years, David had been secretly embezzling money from the company. He had created fake vendor accounts, inflated construction costs, and transferred millions of dollars to offshore accounts, but it was worse than simple embezzlement. David had also taken out massive loans in the company's name, loans that John knew nothing about. He had used these loans to finance secret real estate deals that had failed. The company was now tens of millions of dollars in debt. "But I would have seen this in our financial reports," John protested. "I reviewed our accounts every month." The agents showed him falsified financial statements that David had been creating. As the company's chief financial officer, David had complete control over the accounting. He had been showing John fake reports while hiding the real numbers. "Mr. Mitchell," Agent Rodriguez said, "as a 50% owner and co-founder of the company, you're legally responsible for these debts and potentially complicit in these crimes. Complicit? I had no idea what David was doing. He's my best friend, was my best friend. I trusted him. That's what you'll need to prove in court, the agent replied. John was allowed to leave the FBI office, but his nightmare was just beginning. When he arrived home that evening, he found Emma in the living room, watching the news on television. His face was on the screen and the headline read, "Boston real estate developer under investigation for fraud and embezzlement." Emma turned to him with tears in her eyes. "John, what's happening?" He collapsed on the couch and told her everything. Emma held him as he cried, something he hadn't done since he was a child. His best friend, the man he trusted more than anyone except Emma, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. "We'll get through this," Emma said, trying to be strong. "You're innocent. The truth will come out." But Emma didn't understand how bad things really were. Over the next few days, as lawyers reviewed the company's finances, the full extent of the disaster became clear. The company was $47 million in debt. Assets were being seized, creditors were demanding payment, and John was personally liable for much of it because he had personally guaranteed many of the loans without realizing that David was misusing the money. Their mansion was mortgaged to secure business loans. Their savings had been invested in the company. Even Emma's jewelry and the children's college funds were at risk. John hired the best lawyers he could find, but they gave him devastating news. "Mr. Mitchell, even though you weren't aware of Mr. Peterson's activities, as a partner, you're legally responsible. You could face criminal charges, and you'll definitely face massive civil lawsuits. You need to prepare for the worst." The worst came faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, creditors filed lawsuits against John. The bank began foreclosure proceedings on his house. His assets were frozen. The company's board of directors voted to remove both John and the absent David, and the company was placed into bankruptcy. John's perfect life was unraveling at terrifying speed, but the personal betrayal hurt more than the financial loss. David had been his friend for 36 years, his business partner for 15 years. They had shared everything: dreams, struggles, successes. David was the best man at his wedding, the godfather to his children. How could David do this to him? How could someone he trusted so completely destroy him so thoroughly? John tried desperately to reach David. He called his cell phone hundreds of times, but it was disconnected. He contacted David's wife, Rebecca, but she claimed she didn't know where David was. Later, John learned that Rebecca had left the country with David, taking their children with them. The FBI eventually tracked David to Panama, but he couldn't be extradited because Panama didn't have an extradition treaty with the United States for financial crimes. David was living freely in Panama City, protected by the money he had stolen, while John's life fell apart. The media coverage was relentless and brutal. Reporters camped outside John's house. His face was on every news channel and newspaper. The story had everything the media loved: wealth, betrayal, scandal. Most reports assumed John was guilty, that he must have known about David's crimes. John's children began suffering at school. Other kids teased them, saying their father was a criminal. Teachers looked at them with suspicion. Sophie, who was 16, came home crying every day. Grace, who was 14, became withdrawn and stopped eating properly. Michael, who was only 11, got into fights defending his father's honor. Emma tried to hold the family together, but John could see the strain on her face. She still supported him, still believed in his innocence, but the pressure was crushing them all. Then came the first major loss. The bank foreclosed on their mansion. They had 30 days to vacate the property. John, Emma, and their 3 children had to pack up their lives and leave the home, where they had created so many beautiful memories. They moved into a small rental apartment in a modest neighborhood. It had 3 bedrooms. The girls shared one room. Michael had another, and John and Emma had the third. It was cramped and uncomfortable, a drastic change from their mansion. John had to sell Emma's Mercedes to pay legal fees. His own car was repossessed. Emma had to sell her jewelry, including her wedding ring. John watched his wife cry as she handed over the ring he had given her 20 years ago, and he felt like his heart was being torn from his chest. But the worst was yet to come. John's trial began 6 months after David's disappearance. He was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The prosecution argued that John must have known about David's activities and was either complicit or criminally negligent. His lawyers fought hard, presenting evidence that John had been deceived by falsified documents, and that he had no access to the offshore accounts David had created. Character witnesses testified about John's honesty and integrity. After a 3-week trial, the jury found John not guilty of fraud and money laundering, but guilty of criminal negligence. The judge sentenced him to 2 years probation and ordered him to pay restitution of $5 million to the creditors. $5 million. John had lost everything and was now ordered to pay $5 million he didn't have. The civil lawsuits were even worse. Multiple creditors sued John personally. The judgments against him totaled over $20 million. Even though he would never be able to pay that amount, the judgments meant that any money he earned for the rest of his life could be garnished. John declared bankruptcy. It was the most humiliating moment of his life. The man who had built a $50 million company was now officially broke, unable to pay his debts, dependent on his wife's modest income as a counselor. Emma continued to support him, but John noticed changes. She became quieter, more stressed. She started working longer hours, taking on extra clients. She was carrying the entire family financially, and the burden was enormous. John tried to find work, but who would hire him? His face had been all over the news as a failed businessman involved in a fraud scandal. Even though he had been acquitted of the most serious charges, the stigma remained. He applied for hundreds of jobs, everything from construction work to retail positions, but no one would hire him. His parents were heartbroken. His father, now in his 70s, offered to help financially, but John refused. His parents had worked too hard for their retirement savings, and John wouldn't take their money. John's brother, Robert, who was a successful lawyer in New York, did something that hurt more than all the financial losses combined. Robert refused to help. When John called him asking for a loan to pay legal fees, Robert said, "John, I have my own family to think about. I can't risk my money on your problems. You got yourself into this mess by trusting the wrong person. That's not my fault." "Robert, I'm your brother," John pleaded. "I just need some help to get back on my feet. I'm sorry." "John, I can't help you." And Robert hung up. John and Robert had been close growing up. Robert had always looked up to John. When Robert graduated from law school, John had lent him money to start his practice. Now when John needed help, Robert turned his back on him. The betrayal by his own brother hurt almost as much as David's betrayal. As months passed, John sank into depression. He stopped leaving the apartment, except for his meetings with his probation officer. He barely ate. He barely slept. He sat in the apartment all day, staring at walls, consumed by thoughts of how everything had gone so wrong. Emma grew increasingly worried. She convinced John to see a therapist, but even therapy couldn't lift the darkness that had settled over him. How could he move on when everything he had built was destroyed? When the person he trusted most had betrayed him? When even his own brother wouldn't help him? His relationship with his children began to suffer. Sophie graduated from high school and got accepted to Harvard University, but they couldn't afford the tuition. She had to attend a community college instead, and John could see the disappointment in her eyes every time she looked at him. Grace became rebellious, angry at the world for what had happened to their family. She started staying out late, hanging out with the wrong crowd, and her grades dropped dramatically. Michael became very quiet and withdrawn. He stopped playing sports, stopped seeing his friends, and spent most of his time alone in his room. John felt like he was failing as a father, as a husband, as a man. Every time he looked at his children, he saw the life he had taken away from them. They used to live in a mansion, go to the best schools, have everything they wanted. Now they were crammed into a tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet, suffering from the stigma of his failure. The guilt was crushing him more than anything else. John's voice was completely flat, emotionless. Rebecca said that David had been planning to disappear for years. He was setting up his escape long before the FBI investigation. He used me. Our entire friendship, our entire partnership was a lie. He was always planning to take the money and disappear. I was just a convenient cover for his crimes. John, I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, John replied. I built my entire life on a foundation of trust, and that foundation was a lie. My best friend was never really my friend. He was using me from the beginning. Every memory I have of our friendship is tainted now. Every good time we shared was fake. Even our childhood friendship might have been part of his long-term plan. You can't know that, John. Maybe your friendship was real when you were children. And he changed later. Does it matter? John asked. Real or fake, it destroyed me either way. And now I know that it was all planned. I didn't just make a mistake in trusting the wrong person. I was deliberately targeted and used by someone who pretended to be my brother for 36 years. How do you come back from that? How do you ever trust anyone again? I didn't have an answer. As I sat there with John, looking at this broken man who had lost everything, his business, his money, his home, his wife, his children, his father, his dignity, his health, and finally even the truth about his past, I realized that some suffering is simply too great for humans to bear. Some betrayals are so complete, so devastating, that they destroy not just a person's present and future, but even their past. John Mitchell survived his heart attack. His body healed enough that he was eventually discharged from the hospital. But the man who left the hospital was not really alive. He was a shell, going through the motions of living without any real purpose or hope. Sophie had her baby, a beautiful little girl, but John barely responded when she told him. He sent a small gift that he could barely afford, but he didn't ask to see the baby. He didn't ask to be part of his grandchild's life. He had nothing left to give. The last time I saw John was 6 months after he left the hospital. I ran into him at a grocery store. He was buying instant noodles and cheap canned food, the same food he used to eat when he was a struggling college student, building his business. We talked for a few minutes. He told me he was still working as a property manager, still living in his studio apartment, still paying his child support and debt payments. He existed, but he didn't live. As we said goodbye, and I watched him walk away, stooped and defeated, I thought about how one person's betrayal had created a cascade of destruction that ruined not just John's life, but the lives of everyone around him. Sophie, a teenage mother. Grace, angry and lost. Michael, growing up in a broken home. Emma, divorced and remarried, trying to rebuild. John's mother, who lost her husband to the stress of watching her son suffer. And John himself, a man who once had everything and now had nothing, not even hope. As I drove home that day, tears streaming down my face, I realized that John's story wasn't just about betrayal or loss or suffering. It was about something more fundamental, about how fragile our lives really are, how much we depend on trust, and how completely we can be destroyed when that trust is violated. John Mitchell had done everything right. He had worked hard, been honest, loved his family, and trusted his best friend. And all of it, every single bit of it, had been torn away from him. Some wounds never heal. Some betrayals are so complete that there is no recovery, no redemption, no happy ending. John Mitchell's story is one of those stories. As I looked at that broken man in the grocery store, buying cheap noodles to survive another day in a life he no longer wanted to live, I realized that sometimes the price of trust is everything, and sometimes that price is simply too high for any human being to pay. 3 days after John told me about his divorce, something happened that would push him over the edge completely. I was doing my rounds in the cardiac ICU when I noticed that John had a visitor. It was unusual because in all the time he had been here, no one had come to see him. Not his children, not his ex-wife, not his brother, no one. He had been completely alone. The visitor was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. As I approached John's room to check his vitals, I could hear raised voices. The young woman was crying, and John was trying to calm her down. I knocked softly and entered. "Mr. Mitchell, is everything all right? I heard voices and wanted to make sure you're okay." John looked at me with eyes full of fresh pain. "Nurse Sarah, this is Sophie. My daughter." Sophie turned to look at me, and I could see that she had been crying for a long time. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face was pale, and she looked absolutely devastated. "I'm sorry for the noise," Sophie said, wiping her tears. "I just needed to talk to my father about something important." "It's okay," I said gently. "I'll give you some privacy. But Mr. Mitchell, please try to stay calm. Your heart needs rest." I left the room but stayed close by, concerned about John's stress levels. He had already suffered one massive heart attack, and emotional stress could trigger another one. About 20 minutes later, Sophie came out of the room. She was still crying, and she looked even more upset than before. She walked past me without saying anything and disappeared down the corridor. I immediately went into John's room to check on him. What I saw terrified me. John was sitting up in bed, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. Tears were streaming down his face, and he was struggling to breathe. "Mr. Mitchell." "John, what happened? Are you having chest pain?" I quickly checked his monitors. His heart rate was elevated. His blood pressure was dangerously high, and the EKG was showing irregular rhythms. I immediately called for the doctor and the emergency team. Within seconds, doctors and nurses flooded into the room. We gave John medications to stabilize his heart, oxygen to help him breathe, and sedatives to calm him down. It took almost 30 minutes to get him stabilized. The doctor ordered additional tests and increased his medications. After everyone left and John was resting more comfortably, I sat down beside his bed. "John," I said softly, "what did Sophie tell you? What upset you so much?" John closed his eyes and fresh tears rolled down his cheeks. "She's pregnant," he whispered. "My 19-year-old daughter is pregnant, and she doesn't know what to do." My heart sank. "Oh, John, I'm so sorry. That's not even the worst part." John continued, his voice breaking. "The father is a boy she met at a party. He's a drug dealer, Nurse Sarah. When Sophie told him about the pregnancy, he said he wanted nothing to do with the baby. He told her to get an abortion or raise it herself because he's not ready to be a father." John opened his eyes and looked at me with such profound sadness that I felt tears forming in my own eyes. "Sophie came here to tell me because she has no one else to turn to. Emma is so disappointed in her that she's barely speaking to her. Her grandparents are ashamed. She's scared, alone, and pregnant at 19 years old. And do you know what the worst part is? She said that if our family had stayed together, if she had still been living in our old house, going to her old school, surrounded by her old friends, this never would have happened. She said that after I destroyed the family, after we lost everything and moved to that tiny apartment, she fell into depression. She started hanging out with the wrong crowd at her new school. She started going to parties, drinking, trying to fit in somewhere because she felt like she had lost her entire life. And at one of those parties, she met this boy. She got pregnant because she was trying to fill the void that I created when I lost everything." The guilt in John's voice was overwhelming. "John, you can't blame yourself for Sophie's choices. She's an adult, and she made her own decisions. How can I not blame myself?" John cried. "If I hadn't trusted David, if I had signed proper legal contracts, if I had protected my assets better, our family would still be together. Sophie would still be at her private school, surrounded by good friends, focused on her education. She would never have been at that party. She would never have met that drug dealer. She wouldn't be pregnant and terrified at 19 years old. What is she going to do?" I asked gently. "She doesn't know," John said. "She's thinking about keeping the baby, but she doesn't know how she'll support it. She's in community college, working part-time at a coffee shop. Emma can barely support herself and the kids as it is. And I'm living in a studio apartment making $35,000 a year with most of it going to child support and debt payments. How can I help her? How can I support a grandchild when I can barely support myself?" Over the next few days, John's condition deteriorated. The stress from Sophie's news, combined with all the accumulated trauma of the past 5 years, was literally killing him. His heart was failing. Despite all our medications and treatments, his cardiac function was getting worse. The cardiologist told John that he might need a heart transplant. But given his age, his overall health condition, and his financial situation, he wasn't sure John would even qualify for the transplant list. John's depression deepened to a level I had never seen before. He stopped eating almost entirely. He barely spoke. He just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, lost in a darkness that no one could penetrate. I tried to talk to him, tried to encourage him, but nothing helped. He had given up completely. Then, 1 week after Sophie's visit, John's son Michael came to see him. Michael was now 14 years old, and I could see that he had been crying. He sat down beside his father's bed and held his hand. "Dad," Michael said quietly, "I need to tell you something." John turned his head slowly to look at his son. "What is it, Michael?" "Mom is getting married to Richard. Next month. She told us last night." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. John's face went completely white, and for a moment I thought he was having another heart attack. I moved closer, ready to call for help, but John just closed his eyes and more tears fell. "Next month," he repeated. "She's getting married next month." "Dad, I don't want her to marry him," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I want you and Mom to get back together. I want our family back. Grace won't talk about it, and Sophie is dealing with her own problems. But I miss you, Dad. I miss our old life. I miss when we were happy." "I miss it too, son," John whispered. "I miss it more than you can imagine." "Then why can't you fix it?" Michael asked desperately. "Why can't you make Mom love you again? Why can't you get our family back?" "Because some things, once they're broken, can't be fixed," John said. "I failed you, Michael. I failed all of you. I lost everything, and I couldn't protect our family. Your mother deserves someone who can take care of her. Someone stable and successful. I'm not that person anymore. But you're my dad, Michael cried. I don't care about money or houses or any of that stuff. I just want my dad back. I want the dad who used to take me to baseball games and help me with my homework and tell me stories before bed. Where did that dad go? He died, John said simply. He died when David betrayed him. When the FBI came to the office. When everything fell apart. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so sorry. Michael left shortly after, and John fell into an even deeper depression. The news that Emma was marrying Richard next month was the final blow. It meant that any hope of reconciliation was gone forever. It meant that Emma had truly moved on, that she had found happiness with someone else, that John had been replaced in every way possible. That night, I found John trying to disconnect his IV lines. John, what are you doing? I rushed over to stop him. I want to leave, John said. I want to go home. I'm tired of being here, tired of fighting, tired of living. Just let me go. Nurse Sarah, let me die with whatever dignity I have left. I can't do that. John, you're my patient, and I'm going to take care of you whether you like it or not. Why? John asked, looking at me with empty eyes. Why do you care? No one else does. My children barely visit me. My ex-wife is marrying another man. My brother won't speak to me. My best friend destroyed my life and died in another country. What's the point of keeping me alive? The point, I said firmly, is that you're still here. You're still breathing. And as long as you're breathing, there's hope. Maybe not hope for getting your old life back, but hope for building something new. Hope for being there for Sophie when she has her baby. Hope for being there for Michael as he grows up. Hope for finding peace with what happened and moving forward. There is no moving forward from this, John said. You don't understand. Nurse Sarah, you can't understand what it's like to lose everything. To have everything you worked for your entire life destroyed in an instant because you trusted the wrong person. You're right, I admitted. I can't fully understand what you've been through. But I've seen a lot of suffering in my 15 years as a nurse. I've seen people survive things that should have killed them. I've seen people rebuild from nothing. The human spirit is stronger than you think. John, you're stronger than you think. But even as I said those words, I wasn't sure I believed them anymore. Looking at John, broken and defeated in that hospital bed, I wondered if there was a limit to how much suffering a person could endure before their spirit was truly destroyed. The next day, something else happened that pushed John even closer to the edge. His brother Robert called. I answered John's phone because John refused to talk to anyone. This is Nurse Sarah. I'm Mr. Mitchell's nurse. This is Robert Mitchell. John's brother, the voice on the other end said. I need to speak with him. He's not able to take calls right now. Mr. Mitchell, he's very weak and needs rest. Well, tell him that our father died this morning. Heart attack. The funeral is in 3 days. My heart sank. I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Mitchell, I'll tell him. Also, tell him not to come to the funeral. Robert added coldly. What? Why would you say that? Because he'll just make it about himself and his problems. Because the stress of seeing him will upset our mother. Because frankly, we don't want him there. He's an embarrassment to the family. Tell him to stay away. Robert hung up before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone, unable to believe what I had just heard. John's father had died, and his own brother was telling him not to come to the funeral. How could anyone be so cruel? I went into John's room, dreading what I had to tell him. John, that was your brother Robert on the phone. What did he want? John asked without opening his eyes. John, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this. Your father passed away this morning. He had a heart attack. John's eyes flew open and he stared at me in shock. Dad? My dad is dead? Yes, John, I'm so very sorry. John started crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. No. Not Dad, please, not Dad. He was the only one who never judged me, who never blamed me for what happened. He told me that he was proud of me no matter what. He can't be gone. He can't be. I held John's hand as he cried, and I made a decision. I wouldn't tell him what Robert had said about not coming to the funeral. I wouldn't add that pain on top of everything else. But John asked, when is the funeral? I need to be there. I need to say goodbye. In 3 days, I said. But John, you're not strong enough to leave the hospital. Your heart. I don't care about my heart, John said fiercely. That's my father. He raised me, supported me, believed in me when no one else did. I have to be at his funeral. I have to. The next 3 days were agonizing. John became obsessed with getting well enough to attend the funeral. He started eating again, not because he wanted to live, but because he needed strength to say goodbye to his father. He did the breathing exercises the respiratory therapist taught him. He got out of bed and walked the hallways, even though it exhausted him. The cardiologist was amazed at John's sudden determination, but he still refused to discharge him. "Mr. Mitchell, your heart is too weak. The stress of attending a funeral could kill you. I can't in good conscience let you leave. Then I'll leave against medical advice," John said. "I'm going to that funeral, doctor. You can't stop me." On the morning of the funeral, John signed the papers to leave against medical advice. I helped him get dressed in the only suit he had left, an old one that hung loosely on his body because he had lost so much weight. I offered to drive him to the funeral home, because he was in no condition to drive himself. We arrived at the funeral home and John slowly walked to the entrance. But before he could go inside, Robert appeared at the door. "What are you doing here, John?" Robert demanded. "I told the nurse to tell you not to come." "I'm here to say goodbye to our father," John said quietly. "You have no right to keep me from my own father's funeral." "You have no right to be here," Robert said coldly. "You've brought nothing but shame to this family. Dad died of a heart attack because of the stress you caused him. He worried about you constantly, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. You killed him, John, just like you killed your business and your marriage and everything else you've ever touched." The words were like physical blows. John staggered backward and I had to catch him to keep him from falling. "That's not true," John said, but his voice was weak, uncertain. "It is true," Robert continued mercilessly. "Everyone knows it. Mom knows it. She doesn't want to see you. It will upset her too much. So do us all a favor and leave. You're not welcome here." "Robert, please," John begged. And hearing this grown man beg his brother broke my heart. He was my father, too. "Please let me say goodbye." "No," Robert said flatly. "Security!" 2 security guards appeared. "Escort this man off the property. If he refuses to leave, call the police." The security guards approached John, and I could see his entire body was shaking. "Please," he whispered one more time. But Robert had already turned his back and gone inside. The security guards politely but firmly escorted us back to my car. John didn't resist. He just walked like a zombie, all the fight gone out of him. When we got to the car, John collapsed into the passenger seat and stared straight ahead. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stared. I drove him back to the hospital in silence. What could I possibly say? How could I comfort someone who had just been denied the chance to say goodbye to his own father? Back in his hospital room, John lay down on the bed and turned his face to the wall. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge anyone for the next 2 days. He refused to eat. He refused medications. He refused everything. The doctors were worried he was giving up entirely, that he was simply waiting to die. On the 3rd day, I came into his room and found him writing something. "John, what are you doing?" "Writing letters," he said in a hollow voice. "To Sophie, to Grace, to Michael, telling them I love them, apologizing for failing them, saying goodbye." "John, no, you're not dying. We're not going to let you die." "I'm already dead." "Nurse Sarah," John said. "I died 5 years ago when David betrayed me. Everything since then has just been a slow, painful decline. But I'm tired now. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of suffering. I'm tired of losing everyone and everything I ever loved. I just want it to be over." "What about your grandchild?" I asked desperately. "Sophie's baby? Don't you want to meet your grandchild?" "Sophie will be better off without me," John said. "They'll all be better off without me. I'm just a reminder of failure, of shame, of everything that went wrong. Let me go, Nurse Sarah. Please just let me go." That night, I sat with John for hours. I held his hand and talked to him about everything and nothing. I told him about my own life, my own struggles, my own losses. I told him that I understood wanting to give up, that I understood feeling like the pain was too much to bear. But I also told him that as long as he was alive, there was still a chance for things to change, for healing to happen, for peace to come. But John was beyond hearing me. He had reached a place of darkness so deep that no light could penetrate it. Over the next week, John's condition deteriorated rapidly. His heart was failing despite all our interventions. His kidneys were starting to fail. His body was shutting down, not just from the physical illness, but from the complete loss of will to live. The doctors held a meeting with me and the other nurses. "We need to discuss Mr. Mitchell's code status," the attending physician said. "Given his condition and prognosis, we should talk to him about do not resuscitate orders." "He has no family to help make that decision," I said. "His children won't return calls. His ex-wife refused to come. His brother explicitly said he doesn't want to be involved." "Then we'll talk to Mr. Mitchell directly," the doctor said. When the doctor asked John about his wishes, John said simply, "If my heart stops, let it stop. Don't bring me back. There's nothing to come back for." We honored his wishes and made him DNR. Do not resuscitate. 2 days later, I was finishing my shift when the alarm went off in John's room. I ran in to find him in cardiac arrest. His heart had stopped. According to his wishes, we didn't attempt resuscitation. I held his hand as the monitor showed a flat line. John Mitchell was dead at 48 years old. But then, just as we were about to call time of death, his heart spontaneously restarted. It was extremely rare, but it happened. John gasped and opened his eyes, looking confused and disoriented. "John, can you hear me?" He looked at me with eyes full of confusion and something else, something that looked almost like disappointment. "Why am I still here?" he whispered. "Why won't God let me die?" That question haunted me. Over the next few days, as John slowly regained some strength, I realized that he had survived not because he wanted to, but because his body refused to give up even though his mind and spirit had. One morning, about a week after his heart had stopped and restarted, John asked me to sit down. "Nurse Sarah, I want to tell you something. I received a message yesterday." "From who?" "From David's widow, Rebecca. She's back in the United States. Her children are grown now, and she wanted to reach out to me." My heart sank. "What did she say?" "She told me the truth about what happened. David didn't have a gambling problem like he said in his message to me. He had another family, Nurse Sarah, a secret family in Panama that he'd been supporting for years. He had a mistress there and 2 children with her. He was embezzling money to support both families." John's voice was completely flat, emotionless. "Rebecca said that David had been planning to disappear for years. He was setting up his escape long before the FBI investigation. He used me. Our entire friendship, our entire partnership was a lie. He was always planning to take the money and disappear. I was just a convenient cover for his crimes." "John, I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," John replied. "I built my entire life on a foundation of trust, and that foundation was a lie. My best friend was never really my friend. He was using me from the beginning. Every memory I have of our friendship is tainted now. Every good time we shared was fake. Even our childhood friendship might have been part of his long-term plan. You can't know that, John. Maybe your friendship was real when you were children, and he changed later. Does it matter?" John asked. "Real or fake, it destroyed me either way, and now I know that it was all planned. I didn't just make a mistake in trusting the wrong person. I was deliberately targeted and used by someone who pretended to be my brother for 36 years. How do you come back from that? How do you ever trust anyone again?" I didn't have an answer. As I sat there with John, looking at this broken man who had lost everything, his business, his money, his home, his wife, his children, his father, his dignity, his health, and finally even the truth about his past, I realized that some suffering is simply too great for humans to bear. Some betrayals are so complete, so devastating, that they destroy not just a person's present and future, but even their past. John Mitchell survived his heart attack. His body healed enough that he was eventually discharged from the hospital. But the man who left the hospital was not really alive. He was a shell, going through the motions of living without any real purpose or hope. Sophie had her baby, a beautiful little girl, but John barely responded when she told him. He sent a small gift that he could barely afford, but he didn't ask to see the baby. He didn't ask to be part of his grandchild's life. He had nothing left to give. The last time I saw John was 6 months after he left the hospital. I ran into him at a grocery store. He was buying instant noodles and cheap canned food. The same food he used to eat when he was a struggling college student, building his business. We talked for a few minutes. He told me he was still working as a property manager, still living in his studio apartment, still paying his child support and debt payments. He existed, but he didn't live. As we said goodbye and I watched him walk away, stooped and defeated, I thought about how one person's betrayal had created a cascade of destruction that ruined not just John's life, but the lives of everyone around him. Sophie, a teenage mother. Grace, angry and lost. Michael, growing up in a broken home. Emma, divorced and remarried, trying to rebuild. John's mother, who lost her husband to the stress of watching her son suffer. And John himself, a man who once had everything and now had nothing, not even hope. As I drove home that day, tears streaming down my face, I realized that John's story wasn't just about betrayal or loss or suffering. It was about something more fundamental, about how fragile our lives really are, how much we depend on trust, and how completely we can be destroyed when that trust is violated. John Mitchell had done everything right. He had worked hard, been honest, loved his family, and trusted his best friend. And all of it, every single bit of it, had been torn away from him. Some wounds never heal. Some betrayals are so complete that there is no recovery, no redemption, no happy ending. John Mitchell's story is one of those stories. As I looked at that broken man in the grocery store, buying cheap noodles to survive another day in a life he no longer wanted to live, I realized that sometimes the price of trust is everything, and sometimes that price is simply too high for any human being to pay.